So hello everyone, my name is Amanda Giraldo and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We're very excited to have everyone here and share part 2 of why competitive games have longer engagement and retention curves. We had part 1 in December, so we'll do a short recap of that before jumping into exciting new material today. Today, our speaker Evan James, Head of Product Marketing at Skillz, will be joining us to talk about his insights on this topic. We'll spend the first 35 minutes walking through the main content of the day, how competitive gaming relates to engagement, retention, and monetization. Then we'll go into a 10-minute Q&A. A few things to note before we start this webinar. Please mute yourself during the presentation to help with the audio quality. If you encounter any audio problems, try to refresh your browser and/or check your computer's audio settings. If you still have any issues, please feel free to notify us in the chat and we'll see how we can help you. If you have a question at any time during the webinar, please feel free to ask through the chat at any time. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded and distributed after in a follow-up email, so you can review the materials later and share with others who might be interested. Before we get started, I'd like to start with a quick poll to see how many people have developed mobile games to give us a better idea of who's listening today. I'll give you a few minutes to participate here. Great. Looks like the results are coming in, and it seems that a bunch of people have developed mobile games, or they're considering building one. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll jump right in. So I'll turn it over to Evan James to introduce himself.
Thanks, Amanda, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm really excited to be with all of you guys today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Evan James. I'm lead up product marketing here at Skillz. I'm really excited about discussing today's topic because generally my role is to help provide all game developers with the right resources to produce the best game that they can possibly have, whether it's a skills game or whether it's just providing you guys with knowledge so that you're able to drive up the game performance of all the games that you work really hard on. So today I'm really excited to really cover a lot of what we're going to go into of how does competitive elements within a game affect different KPIs. So we're going to go into looking at engagement and what kind of features and different things affect growing engagement rates. Also for player retention. Player retention is also very key for showcasing a game's performance, as I'm sure all of you guys know. And then really looking into how both of those things tie to monetization. So having strong engagement rates and strong retention rates are something that are kind of like being able to tell where is my overall game monetization going to go when a game goes live early, and then how am I going to increase that revenue over time. We'll be looking at a little bit of all of that. So just to get started here, a little bit of what's on the agenda. Back in December, we held part 1 of this webinar, so we're going to give a quick recap on just a bit of that. I know a lot of you guys were probably either on the webinar, but some time has passed. You had the holidays, maybe you were doing other things, so I want to make sure that we're touching on it, and potentially some of you guys haven't been on the webinar at all. So we're going to cover a little bit of what are the 3 pillars of competitive gaming, and we're also going to look into the demographics of competitive gaming. One of the really interesting things here is when you look at sort of generally game demographics, there is a difference between competitive games and between non-competitive games. So we'll want to take a look at that. There's a really fun analysis of 2018 top revenue games look like, both in terms of top revenue grossing games overall and top esport games. So we'll take a look at some of the differences there. And then we'll jump into kind of the main content, the relationship between skill-based competitive gaming and player engagement. And right after that, the relationship between competitive and player retention. And then finally, we'll wrap up with, how does this affect overall game monetization? Something that I'm sure all of you guys are curious about as you're, spending time. I saw in the poll that many of you guys are currently developing a game, so I'm sure you want to know what is kind of the final monetization of all the efforts that you've put into that. So great. So to get started, we're going to first talk about the 3 pillars of competitive gaming. And one of the kind of key things to understand what makes up a competitive game is to look at this from a traditional sport. So whenever you're thinking about traditional sport, there are three things that you want to have. The first is there's competition against real-world players. It's always more fun that if you're competing against somebody, that you're competing against a real, live individual rather than an AI. Maybe there's a few exceptions. If you're a grandmaster chess or something of the sort, then maybe you want to play the world's best AI. But most individuals really want to make sure that they're playing against a real live person and that they are able to compete against a real human being. The second pillar is actually, it's kind of two things. It's fairness and matchmaking. There's a great example of looking at, a soccer team for both of these things. The first thing is fairness. So within any soccer game, if you had one team that was abiding by the rules completely, and then the other team that didn't abide by any rules, they were using their hands. The referee wasn't saying that they had to follow any of the rules. It wouldn't really be a fair game. Part of the experience of any game is making sure that the rules that both teams are abiding by. So that's another kind of key thing for making sure that your game is fair and that the competition is fair. The second part of that is matchmaking. Using the same sort of soccer analogy, one thing you would not really want to see as a spectator, or you would not want to participate as a player, would be if you were, sort of a high school team playing against a professional league team. It wouldn't be a fair or a fun match to watch. You would probably just have people of completely different skill levels competing, and the results would most likely be the same every time, where the professional team is winning. So making sure that you have a matchmaking system so that players of equal skill levels or teams of equal skill levels are playing against each other is kind of key for having that competitive gaming. And the third part is the competitive hub. In traditional sports, this would be an arena, a field, a basketball court, whatever place the actual players are taking place. The competition is taking place. In the digital world, this is making sure that you have players that are gathering in one centralized location to be able to find other players of relatively same skill level and compete against each other. A great example of this would be Match.com for chess, or of course the Skillz ecosystem if you're considering building a Skillz game. So those are kind of the three pillars of competitive gaming. Again, if you are interested in diving deeper into that, do check out part 1 within this series. Another thing that we really looked at that is important to bring up is the demographic difference of competitive gaming. Newzoo in that image on the right, one kind of cool thing that we looked at is that the size of the market for games, for mobile games overall, is growing drastically, which has really changed kind of the demographics of gaming. There are 2.6 billion mobile gamers that exist in the world, and so what we've seen when it comes to mobile games altogether is you have a much wider demographic. So you have players from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So you have different genders participating, players of all ages, different ethnicities. And so this has really widened up the demographic, and it has also widened up what types of genres are available and are desired by the players that are on it. And so you've really seen kind of a difference in terms of the market has diversified in genre types to meet the player demands. On PC or console, one of the differences here is the demographic. Of course, there are players of all different demographics, but generally speaking, it skews to a younger male demographic. And there is also something where mobile has opened up the accessibility that you don't really have with PC and console. And what I mean by that is just that it's much more affordable to buy a smartphone than it is to invest in a high-end console or a high-end PC. And so this has really created a different kind of socioeconomic background for mobile games.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Evan. Could you share a little bit more about what genres you would say are good for all demographics?
Yeah, so genres that are good for all demographics, I would say there is not necessarily a specific genre that is going to cover all demographics, but just generally when you're thinking about developing a game, having that kind of demographic first mentality is really useful. So when you're kind of doing your game iterations or game design documents and you're thinking about, all right, who is it that I really want to target, really focusing in on that player demographic is extremely useful. There can be multiple demographics for a game, so you could have something that skews more male and younger and more female and older, but really thinking about that and understanding what is the demographic of a different genre is key. There's also a ton of research if you go online and look up just genre and demographics. I definitely recommend taking a look when you're kind of in the game development process. And so the last part of how does instilling competitive elements into games shift the gender and age demographic? One of the things that we've seen is that competition is actually sort of the number 2 gamer motivation model, meaning that it's something that really drives the player experience in terms of why they're choosing to participate in game. And one thing that we've seen is that competition is ranked really highly amongst both males and females. And as you get into the older brackets, competition is equally as important to both males and females. So what that means to overall competitive gaming interactions is that, or demographics, is that generally competition is something that both males and females, especially older demographics, like. And so when you are thinking about creating a competitive game, understanding that your audience is not limited to a younger male demographic is something key to take in mind. Cool. So we're going to take a little bit of a different gear here and look at some of the top games in 2018. So on the left-hand side, you'll see just generally the 2018 top revenue games. You can see, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these titles. Call of Duty coming up as number 1, Red Dead Redemption 2 as number 2. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the 2018 top esports. Now, the reason that I brought this up is one of the really interesting things when looking at it a little bit more is on that bottom chart, you'll see those same titles, but you can also see the content type. So you can see whether it is a sequel, it is a franchise installment, or a standalone, and you can see the initial release here. And one of the interesting things when looking into this was that the sort of top revenue games altogether, on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's only one standalone, Marvel's Spider-Man, and also all the initial release year is 2018. So they were the top revenue games, but they released in 2018. Now, when you look at the same thing from an esport perspective, you'll see that there's definitely a few sequels and franchise installments, but you have a lot of different standalone ones. And if you look at the initial release year, you'll see that there's actually none that were released in 2018, and the earliest going back to 2009 with League of Legends. Now, why is this relevant to bring up? Well, it's kind of showing how competition affects general player retention. So on the left-hand side, one of the things that game developers are constantly struggling with is how do we struggle to keep content fresh? They're consistently needing to iterate, which is extremely resource-heavy. You have to create a new game to keep up with the ever-growing player demand. But for multiplayer competitive games, you more or less need to keep the same gameplay, the map, and all those things so that the players can maintain their skill level and they really feel like they're able to compete consistently against players without having to learn a whole new game again. And so when it comes to esports, you see just generally longer player retention and higher player engagement. And so this is really just something interesting to kind of point out of how does instilling competitive elements into a game really affect that.
So for devs who don't have these resources like the big studios and are interested in Skillz, can you share a bit more about the retention on Skillz-powered games and how that's increasing based on these new features?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to jump into a whole section on player retention, so there's definitely slides coming up for that. And we're going to walk through also some of the features that Skillz provide that are specifically focused on engagement. So we'll definitely get to that. Cool. So before getting into retention, we're going to jump right into player engagement and competition on mobile. So generally, player engagement, definitely you'll see different variations of it, whether you're using a different monetization type. So if you are using premium content overall, you're going to see higher player engagement. The way that a player is coming into it is they're saying, I'm going to pay for the content right up front, and I'm willing to invest that money to have access to the full game, and I'm going to consistently play that game over a period of time until I want to move on to the next game. So generally speaking, engagement of premium content games is pretty high. But with in-app purchases or ad models, engagement is a little bit more tricky. You have to really kind of focus in on how do you utilize in-app purchases or ad models so that it doesn't drastically reduce your player engagement. If you are using something where either in-app purchases, for starting with in-app purchases, if it is not allowing the player to receive a wide amount of the overall content, then they're really only getting a little bit of the total gameplay experience, and this can hurt engagement. Additionally, if they're only able to progress within a game using an in-app purchase and they're not willing to pay for that purchase, this will also be something that kind of hurts engagement because they don't feel like I'm able to progress past that. With ads, it's something that's a little bit more tricky because ads sometimes do disrupt the player experience, and you often see that players will stop playing at a particular point in the game where they might have continued if there was no ad. So it's just something to really, really think about whenever you're using these monetization models of how do you use it so that it's not going to take that hit on engagement. And one of the big recommendations, when looking at any aspect of game development is just consistently doing game iterations, testing, and understanding how do I utilize these different monetization models so that it's not taking a big hit on engagement. Now, one of the different, the model that we represent is sort of the competitive tournaments. And what we've seen is that this actually is a way to monetize, and it helps engagement. So we have a number of different leagues, leaderboards that play on the psychological reward of competition. So a league or leaderboard is where players across all parts of the game are ranked based on their skill level and based on how many times they've played and whether they've won or lost, to understand where do I fall against all other players within a system. And this is really playing on the point 2 in this, which is the ability to accurately measure themselves against opponents. They know, okay, all different players within this particular game have been competing for this leaderboard over the past 2 days, and I'm currently number 10. If I want to move up in the leaderboard, I'm going to need to enter this many more matches, and I'm going to need to win those matches. And so this is something that is just really useful for driving up player engagement, and it's especially useful for player engagement of already engaged players or whales or VIP players. So it's both a good kind of engagement tool, and if they're playing for a cash tournament, it's also a good monetization tool. So in terms of the relationship between player retention and competition on mobile, generally retention rates, again, vary based on genre and monetization. And I should mention also with engagement that you should look at genre as well. Again, if you just search, I think TechCrunch just put out a great article that showed both genre by engagement and retention rates. There are differences there, so being cognizant of that when you're creating the game for benchmarking purposes is really useful. But again, the retention rates are something that across monetization models do have a drastic effect. So when it comes to premium content, you'll see higher retention rates. However, when it comes to the monetization, that monetization has already happened once. So the the person as the player has paid on install, so there's very little monetization that happens after it. It's great if they're retaining within the game because they may purchase a second version of the game when you release it, or something related to, if it's a franchise game, they may purchase another title. But you're probably not going to monetize if it's purely a premium model only. Of course, you can build in in-app purchases, and some premium content games do that, but generally that's just something to note. But when it comes to in-app purchases, this is just another thing that you have to be cognizant of, making sure that in-app purchases are built in a way where a player doesn't get frustrated and doesn't want to not come back to the game. And the same thing kind of goes for advertising as well. When it comes to incorporating competition and pairing the right features, there are really smart ways to do this to increase retention rates. If you look at the image on the left-hand side, you can see a bunch of push notifications. And one of the ways that we really utilize push notifications is pairing it up with other retention features. So for instance, going back to the leagues or leaderboard example, one of the things that we'll do is if there's 4 hours left in a league, we'll send out a push notification saying there are 4 hours left to compete on this leaderboard. So make sure to get back in the game and try your best to be at the top of the leaderboard. This is a great way to retain players so that they're coming back and consistently playing for more. Additionally, we'll have kind of one-off events, something like a double tickets weekend, which is our ticket system is a loyalty program. And so you'll get players that maybe haven't played in the game for a couple days that are thinking, I haven't been in the game for a couple days, but I would really like to drive up my overall amount of tickets, which I can then spend on the tickets leaderboard. And so what this is basically just showing is that retention is key, or retention is definitely driven by competition, but it's really about making sure that you're pairing it with the right features so that you can hit on the sort of psychological rewards. And for these, they're both a clear sense of mastery of showing that you're progressing within a game, and also, again, the ability to accurately measure themselves against opponents. And this would be more on the leaderboard and league side of things.
Great. So for this, how would you compare mobile and all these elements to PC and console?
Yeah, so when it comes to engagement and retention on mobile versus PC and console, it's a difficult comparison. A lot of console and PC is focused more on the premium content, and so you'll see different engagement rates there. And in addition, as mentioned kind of earlier, a lot of the content types or genres that are on PC and console aren't necessarily in the same category. So you've seen a huge growth in casual and hyper casual on mobile. There are of course casual and hyper casual games on both PC and console, but not at the same extent as you would see on mobile. So the engagement rates do differ there. I would say genre plays kind of a big piece into that as well. Great. So now one thing that I'm sure you guys are all wondering is, well, how does engagement and retention correlate to monetization? And one of the kind of key points, and that's something that we're very, for anybody that's considering building a Skillz-powered game, one of the great things that we see is we do see average engagement rates that are higher than sort of single-player games or non-competitive games. And secondly, they have longer retention curves. So this is really something that is cool about our system, where a game, once they've gone through the right iterations, they found kind of that secret sauce to having a successful game, they will maintain a player base while doing relatively few new game iterations to that game. And this is incredibly cool because you just see a retention curve that really spans a much longer period of time. So some of our players or some of our games have had a growing DAU over years with relatively little iterations to the game. And relatively little iterations also mean relatively few costs that have gone into upgrading or improving that game. which generally means that the ROI of that game has really gone through the roof. So a couple things on this. Increasing, if you're able to generally increase higher engagement, you're going to see an immediate increase in ARPDAU on sort of paying cash users. So if you have somebody that is consistently playing in cash tournaments and you can get them to play more often, you can get them to engage and enter more matches, the average ARPDAU is going to go up. So this is something that competition really helps. And again, having those features to help the engagement rates are really key for here. So again, going to kind of how are they ranking against different leaderboards will mean a VIP player will enter more matches, and generally that will lead to a higher ARPDAU for those players. And then the second thing is on the longer retention curves. This just shows that you have a much larger revenue over time and better game ROI. So if you are able to retain your players and so that they're consistently coming back for more and more, then you're going to see a game that is consistently building revenue over time, and generally because you're not investing the same costs as you would for developing a new game, that game ROI, or making improvements to that game, that ROI is growing more and more. So generally those are the two things that kind of how engagement and retention correlate to monetization. So going through some of the key Skillz SDK features, engagement and how they relate to engagement, retention, acquisition, and monetization. There's a number of features here, so I'll just touch on them kind of lightly and really touch on what they're what KPI they're particularly good at driving. The first thing is single sign-on. So we have for all of our different games the ability to create one Skillz account and sign on to all of them. This is just good for kind of minor acquisition. We have a high number of our players that play multiple Skillz titles, and so they're consistently looking for new content to try out. So by just being kind of a part of the Skillz brand, there is some uplift in terms of acquisition. Multiplayer tournaments, this is something that kind of spans everything. So it goes from engagement, retention, monetization, the ability to compete against other players for the thrill of competition or for a cash match is kind of the key to what we are at Skillz. And we do see that generally this is something that is a driver for both engagement, retention, and for cash matches for monetization. Virtual currency, so a lot of our users like to play for free, and one of the ways that this is useful for kind of growing the overall performance of the game is you get a lot of players that come in, they're playing strictly Z matches, but then they decide, you know what, I've really increased my skill level, I would like to try out some cash matches, and so this is a good way to kind of drive up monetization of that. Our tickets program, basically for every cash match that a player enters, you receive a certain amount of tickets. You also receive a lower amount of tickets for any virtual currency match that you enter. And you're able to redeem these tickets in a ticket store. This is a great loyalty program, especially for our VIP players. So good for sort of player retention. Trophies, this is something that is really good for kind of the monetization aspect, also good for engagement retention. Again, it's kind of showing that you're mastering something, so it's one of the key competitive elements. And some of the awards that we give are things like bonus cash, and bonus cash is great, especially for the players that are currently only using virtual currency, because it gives them a taste of how can I enter into a cash match, which then often converts them into depositing and playing for more cash matches. Leagues and leaderboards, as mentioned, are great for engagement and retention, especially of your VIP player base, which then means it's a great monetization method of sort of your whales, of your most important players. Push notifications is definitely awesome for retention, getting players to come back into the game. It also helps to drive some engagement, but I would say retention is the key there. The store is just a pure monetization method, so this is where you're able to players are able to deposit cash. They're also able to see limited time offers for bonus cash. Player chat is great for engagement. Also is key for letting players know that they're playing up against other real-world players, which again is one of the key or one of the pillars of any competitive game. And generally just a good engagement feature. We've seen that players that are chatting generally have much higher engagement rates than players that aren't chatting. The fairness engine, that is just another kind of key element to competitive gaming, so ensuring that players are being matched up against players of equal skill, and that there's anti-cheating, anti-fraud things in place. Something basically that is ease of mind for you, that all matches will be fair, and that players will be matched up against equal levels. Social features, we have a number of them, but generally speaking, they're good for both acquisition. So, we have a friends feature for some of our enterprise games that allows for players to reach out to other friends on social networks and get them into the Skillz games. So that's great for acquisition, and also just great for engagement. So it's always more fun if you are able to compete against people that you know in real life, and it just drives up engagement. And then the last one calling out here is player levels, which is, again, kind of playing on that sense of mastery. So it's showing that you're improving in skill in an individual game or across all Skillz games overall. It's great for engagement. So a lot of players will come in, they'll be like, I want to get to that next level, I want to level up, so I'm going to play more and more matches to be able to do so. So those are some of our key Skillz SDK features. If you want me to expand on any of those, feel free to drop in the chat, or also you can write to us at any point, and would love to give you more information about that. So generally, just going to leave you here with a couple of key stats related to this. Overall, one of the things that Skillz has seen is that competitive gamers are sort of mobile's most engaged and underserved audience. Overall, the monetization is up to 6 times better than single player gamers. It is kind of showing the power of competition, and I think we've really kind of honed in on how do we create a competitive player experience that adds to your gameplay. So it's not something that is disruptive, as sometimes unfortunately ads can be, or in-app purchases, but it's really adding something that is going to help drive the monetization. And also you can see they play 2 times longer than single player gamers. This is just showing a little bit of how we drive up engagement. In addition, something that's cool is we've awarded $500 million in tournament prizes overall, and then really honing again on sort of that engagement. 63 minutes a day are spent by the average skill player. The industry average for a mobile game is 33. So again, this is just showing how a lot of these competitive elements and some of our key SDK features are doing that. And lastly, with Skillz, we've seen a 24% increase in player D30 retention for any game developer that has come on and built out a Skillz-powered version of an existing game. And they've seen an 18-cent increase in incremental ARPDAU for our average developer partner. And what's really cool is there's 0 impact on existing revenue streams. So if you have an existing game that is utilizing ads or in-app purchases, you can create a Skillz-powered game and do kind of smart cross-promotion, smart UA, where it doesn't affect the overall monetization of your main SKU. So something just to keep in mind when you're looking at kind of all the games in your portfolio. If you think, well, I have a game already, but I'm worried about it, one of the great things is we'll definitely work with you to make sure that we're creating a Skillz-powered version of your game that is fun, it's engaging, it has high retention rates, hopefully is on track to monetize well, but it doesn't impact the revenue stream of your existing games. And lastly, I'm just going to leave you with 2 quick things. One is we are getting ready to launch our Season 2 Indie Ignite competition There's a chance to win a grand prize valued at $50,000. There's actually 2 of them that are coming out, so just kind of stay tuned for that. It's basically going through our integration process and signing up on a form and launching a great and highly successful Skillz-powered game, which there will be more details coming for that soon. And then lastly, if you are joining GDC or if you are living in the Bay Area, we would love to see you at a game jam, which we're holding on Sunday, March 17th at Bespoke. It's in San Francisco from 12 to 8. Generally speaking, we'll be doing 2 different things there. One is we'll be helping game developers that are currently going through our developer console or going through our integration process. We'll be helping them with that integration, giving them a lot of feedback. And secondly, we'll have our game design and development experts there that will be both helping any game developer that is creating a Skillz-powered version game get some game design and game development feedback. But also if you just have a game that you want some expertise from, a lot of our designers will be walking around and giving solid, concrete feedback onto how to make iterations on your game so that it can be as successful as possible. Great. So we're going to take a quick poll just to see if anybody wants to learn more about Game Jam. Then we can send over that information and can give you the registration link. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to fill that out, and then we'll jump into Q&A. All right, awesome. It looks like a number of you guys want to attend, so we'll definitely make sure to get that information over to you. Perfect. So we're going to jump into QA. I think Amanda is going to pull up some of the questions that you guys submitted via chat, and I'll try my best to answer them.
Awesome. So we have a first-time attendee. They're asking, what can a player do to their phone to give them an advantage over a clean phone?
You know, I would love to answer that question. If you would mind, I'm going to take that one back to our integrations team and really clarify on what it is that you're looking for in that answer. I don't want to give anything that I'm not positive on. So I definitely will make sure that we get back to you.
Okay, great. We'll just move on to the next question here. Which demographic targeting has worked well with Skillz?
Yeah, this is something that is really interesting in that we've seen a wide range of demographics that have worked well. Now, with that in mind, it isn't uniform across every game. So every game has a different demographic that has functioned well. So it is pretty game specific. But overall, one thing I can say is that we have seen that our demographic we have literally all different types of demographics. We have more females than males playing Skillz-powered games. We see different age demographics, so we have a great kind of split, everything from young to middle-aged to old, different ethnic backgrounds. It does depend a little bit on your game, so different, if you're creating a more of an arcade action game, it will probably have a different demographic than if you're creating a solitaire game. But that is just something for you guys to think about. But overall, the Skillz system is ready to bring on kind of any player demographic.
Great. So what is Skillz' strongest channel of acquisition?
That's a great question. So there is actually a webinar called Player Acquisition on a Shoestring Budget. I highly recommend it to any sort of indie game developer that has a limited budget where they're looking to drive new players into a game. It's kind of developer specific. We do use a number of different ad networks, so smaller ad networks like Bungle and stuff like that. We use Facebook a lot, cross promo, interstitial ads. There's a wide range within our within our user acquisition team. But for any kind of advice on that, I would definitely recommend checking out that webinar. It's highly useful for you guys to be able to understand, okay, how am I going to get some initial DAO without breaking the bank?
Great. Looks like we also have a two-part question here. We'll go to the first part of it. As a developer, how can I monetize on the Skillz platform?
Yeah, definitely. So, and then I think the second part of that question, if I'm seeing it, can you explain the relationship between Skillz and the developer? So I'm going to start with that one, and then I'll get to the monetization part. So the relationship between the Skillz and the developer, if you go to developers.skillz.com, you can see you have access to a free developer console. This is where you would go to download our SDK, build up the integrations, set up tournaments, set up everything that you need to have to go live with the game. We also provide analytics there so that you're able to, once you launch a game, see like how is my game performing, am I growing in DAO, everything of that sort. And our relationship is, we want to, we're successful kind of if you're successful. So as you guys grow in DAO, as you guys grow in performance and in monetization, that's where our relationship is really truly a partnership. So I guess with that in mind, while you're working on integration, we have a heavy documentation that will help you get through that integration process as much as possible, in addition to high quality customer support to help you guys get live with a Skillz powered game. Now related to monetization, we have something where we have cash enabled games. Basically, you can check out within our documentation there are about 7 different requirements to becoming cash enabled. One is having 100 DAO, also passing a fairness check, so making sure that the game is fair. That also passing a skill algorithm check, so we only will support games that are more than 65% skill based. And once this happens, then once you hit all of those requirements, you have the ability to become cash enabled, the ability to start monetizing. So there's documentation on there. We definitely are looking for you guys to monetize. And we also provide help as your game grows in performance to help kind of grow that monetization. Again, it's a relationship of where if you guys perform well, so do we.
I think one that we touched on a little bit earlier, but how long does an average player play on the Skillz platform?
So the average player plays about 63 minutes per day. In terms of like the lifespan of a player, we have different variations within our player base. It also kind of depends on which game they come in on. But generally, I would say, I don't have the stat, off the top of my head, but we do have pretty long retention curves. We also have a very strong percentage. I can't, unfortunately, it's not a public stat, but a strong percentage of players that play more than one Skillz title. So they will come in on one game, and then they will continue playing a second game, a third game, a fourth game, and this is just something that we're quite proud of at Skillz, and also helps our game developers from player acquisition perspective.
All right, let's go ahead and jump here. So how does genre affect engagement and retention rates?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit, but it heavily does. Generally speaking, something like a strategy game would have a high amount of engagement, a little bit less retention, whereas something that is a sort of social turn-based or solitaire game would have a little bit lower engagement, but it'll have much longer retention. I would recommend there's a TechCrunch article that we could that I definitely recommend checking out. Just Google genre and engagement and retention, it'll pop right up. But that's just really something that's useful for benchmarking when you're creating that sort of genre type.
Great. Another interesting question here. So has there been any consideration to bring Skillz to a desktop platform?
That is a great question. I would definitely be interested in speaking with this game developer at some point. I think we are always considering what the next version of Skillz, the Skillz SDK will be. In terms of, there's no concrete answer there, I guess, but I'll reach out to you and follow up personally with that.
Okay, great. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Evan, for answering all those questions, but I'd really also like to thank our audience today for engaging in our presentation. It's always great to interact with everyone on these webinars, and we hope you got some really helpful information through this session. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us at developers.skillz.com or send us an email at launch@skillzdev.com. Thank you again for your time, and remember that we'll be sending out the link and a follow-up email. So if there's anything you didn't quite catch or want to review, we'll be sure to get that resource to you. All right.
All right, and thank you guys so much. I really appreciated you taking the time to come out. Hopefully it was useful and interesting, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you guys some at GDC. Thanks.
Have a great rest of your day.